Hello guys, we are in the chapter of economic planning. Our today's topic is structural bottleneckness of Indian economy. First of all, when it comes to this topic, this is actually a very important one and a crucial one to understand the industrialization concept in India. All of you know that the concept of industrialization earlier actually it was started in UK in the year of 1740. So generally we call this as Industrial Revolution 1.0. By the time of 1740, actually India wasn't existed as a country. We were merely a group of kingdoms ruled by different kings. So once Britishers came and occupied our country, by the time we reached 1858, so that time the nationalization and everything got improved and we actually formed as a nation. So one positive thing that happened because of the Britishers was political unification of India. By the time we reached our independence, that is 1947, most of the world developed countries at that time, they were already had this industrialization. 1947, that was the time industrialization 2.0 was actually going on. Even though that India got independence in 1947, we never industrialized our country parallel to the other developed industrial countries. So we did industrialization after independence, but it was not at par with the developed countries. Why? What is the reason behind this? What are the failures of our planning as part of this industrialization? All these things we are going to see in this chapter. So first, if you look at this particular one, Industrial Revolution in India. If you see Indian industrialists, first of all, if you look at the features of Indian industrial sector or Indian economy as a whole, in 1947, the Indian industrialists, they did not have the enough capital. First of all, you might have already understand factors of production by now. You might have already understood this or read this. What are the factors of production? Land, labor, capital, organization or entrepreneur or entrepreneurial company. So this land, labor, and third important one is capital. Without this capital, you cannot bring any industry. Which means without any investment, how any company can start a business? It is almost impossible. So capital is a very crucial one. By the time we reached independence in 1947, Indian industrialists, they did not have the capital. They did not have the capital in the sense, they didn't have the enough capital to bring more industrialization in India. And second important point is Indian market, it was not big enough for business. Today if you see, you launch any product in the world, might be iPhone or might be a flying saucer or might be a Samsung mobile or might be a Kia car or might be Ford car, anything in the world. The world countries will look into the Indian market. Why? Because in India, the number of people living in the world, we are at number 2. So China and India, these are the bigger markets for any country's product. But in 1947, India market was not big enough because market, it doesn't come from population. Market comes from purchasing power. If you have more population, that doesn't mean you have market. You should have more population with more purchasing power. In 1947 also we were a populated country, but then times we didn't have the purchasing power. But today in 2021, in this economical time period, this market, the Indian market, it has more population, at the same time it has more purchasing power, isn't it so? We have more purchasing power today. And one more thing is the state has to play a big role. So if you look here, we didn't have the capital, and even to start businesses, our market was weak. Then the private investors, without capital, without market, why they'll invest in India? Any private industry, why actually they start business? They start business with a profit motive. If market is not there, you cannot receive profits. First of all, if capital itself is not there, you cannot start a business. So because of these reasons, the state refers to government or the country itself or the government. So the government, it had to play a big role in Indian industrialization. So the investments, the creation of market, bringing of industrial revolution, everything, it was on the shoulders of the government itself. This is the primary reason why in India, instead of private sector, why India developed public sector in the initial days of its independence. It is because of this reason. So if you move forward, industrial policy, if you go to any country, to develop as an industrial nation or to develop industries in the country or in the economy, you need to have an industrial policy. Similarly, India is not an exception to this. So India also have industrial policies. In that, the most known industrial policies that you need to remember as far as the UPSC examination is concerned, that is these ones. Industrial Policy 1948, that is just immediately after the independence. Industrial Policy 1956, the most important industrial policies of all. Industrial Policy 1977, a mere addition to this 1956 policy. Industrial Policy 1980, actually we never discussed this. Industrial Policy 1990, this I will discuss in the LPG reforms. And Industrial Policy 1991, actually both are actually same. So this we will discuss in the LPG reforms. So in this class, our focus directly will go to this 1956 Industrial Policy Resolution. But if you look at the broader picture of this Industrial Policy Resolution 48, 56, 77, 80, 1991, if you look at all these industrial policy resolutions, first let me throw some light on these industrial policy resolutions. The first one is 1948 Industrial Policy Resolution. If you look here, red tapeism. What is meant by red tapeism? Red tapeism is nothing but delays. If you are postponing anything or if you are doing something called procrastination, that generally we call it as red tapeism. Red tapeism in public sector, because the government never came up with a great policy. So because of that reason, there was a red tapeism. And the progress of private sector was not possible. I already gave you the reasons why the private sector progress was not possible, because we didn't have the enough capital, we didn't have the bigger market for the business. So when there is no market and no capital, obviously private sector cannot enter. Coordination problems between the government and the public sector. What exactly meant by the public sector? Any company which is owned by the government is called public sector. If there is a good coordination between the public sector and the government, then definitely you can improve the business. Example, today you see BSNL, it is a public sector company. But till 2020, BSNL never provided the 4G services. But if you look at the other companies like Airtel, Jio, Idea, Vodafone and some other companies, they have already provided the Jio since 2016-17, that time itself. Then why can't the BSNL? Because the coordination between this public sector company and the government is very questionable, and there is a big problem in this coordination. Because of the lack of this coordination, even in 1948, there were some problems of coordination between the government and the public sector. So this is not a new problem. Whatever the problem that we witnessed in 2019, 20, 21, 22, when it comes to the BSNL, that is not actually a new problem. That is the old problem itself that has been continuing since independence. So this is 1948 resolution. 1956, anyway I will explain now. The public sector pushed it to backdrop. We never gave importance to the public sector because we went with the concept of mixed economy. What is meant by mixed economy? The public sector and private sector, both of them, they work in the economy, which means we give importance to public sector companies. At the same time, we give importance to the private sector companies. On paper, we said we give importance to both of them, but actually in reality, we gave importance only to the public sector companies but not private sector companies. Because of that reason, the private sector, it pushed it to backdrop, it went back, and it also hampered private entrepreneurship. No private sector company, it was ready to start a business in India because they thought that if we start business in India, there is no profitable line for us. So why to enter into area or why to enter into arena where you cannot win, right? And private sector took some benefits of loopholes. Even though that some private sector companies have entered, they benefited from the loopholes in our industrial policies. They really didn't want to do the business in India. They just wanted to have the profit by using those loopholes, and the state was overburdened. If private sector company is working complementary with you, then state will not be burdened. If private sector is completely absent, do you really believe that state can take care of everything? Imagine tomorrow all the private sector buses, they have stopped the transportation when it comes to the passenger traffic. Imagine what would happen to the whole passenger traffic. Would the state buses be sufficient to take the people from one place to another place? Not possible, right? Imagine if all the private sector flights have been stopped. Do you think Air India can take care of everything when it comes to the passenger traffic in civil aviation? Not possible. When private sector is not working, or when private sector stopped working, the state will be overburdened. And when it comes to 1977 and 1980, that time, we actually never brought any radical changes in our industrial policies. Whatever the industrial policy we had in 1956, we actually followed it through. Even we implemented this 1956 policy till 1990 economic reforms. Even though we made some chota mota changes in this 1977 and 1980, it was not actually bigger in scope. In that particular scenario, there were no radical changes in the foreign collaborations and no radical changes in the industrial policy. And also we failed to limit production of articles and denying availability of funds. Which means we never encouraged the private sector to start the business in terms of credit funding and in terms of production also. By the time we reached 1980-90, there were some district industries actually we opened. In 1955, we appointed one committee that is called Carway Committee. This Carway Committee said for the rural development, we have to kickstart the rural industrialization. Rural industrialization is possible only with the MSME sector, that is micro, small and medium enterprises. Micro, small and medium enterprises in the sense small industries. Today we have changed the definition in the year of 2006, but in 1947 the definition was different. So in 1955 we appointed one committee that is called Carway Committee. This Carway Committee, it emphasized that if we have to really develop India, that to the rural development, we have to focus more on MSMEs. So in 1955, by following the recommendations of Carway Committee, the Indian government reserved some industries for MSMEs only, which means, let's say MSME, it is producing this shirt. No big MNC company is allowed to produce this shirt other than MSMEs. So we reserved some industries for MSMEs only, so that the competition between the bigger companies and smaller companies can be avoided. Some goods we allowed only the MSMEs can be produced. Bigger companies, they cannot enter into that arena. But unfortunately, by the time we reached 1990, because of our compulsions, we had to remove these restrictions. So we closed some of the district industries and the GDP went down, and the infrastructure also, it affected the industries because day by day the population was increasing, the demand for the number of goods were increasing, but the GDP was not increasing. When there is no GDP with the government will be in deficiency of funds. When there is a deficiency of funds, you cannot create infrastructure. When there is no infrastructure, you cannot bring industrialization. Infrastructure, development, both are directly proportional. If there is more infrastructure, there will be more GDP and then more development. If there is less infrastructure, less GDP, less development. So this is directly related proportion. And by 1990, we failed to promote the small scale industries, and in 1991 we all together changed the policies of industries itself because of the LPG reforms. This I will explain as a separate chapter. But now what we have to understand, overall superficially I have explained this, but I haven't entered into the depth of the concept. This is the time for us to enter into the depth. What is that? So this is your industrial policy resolution 1956. What exactly this industrial policy resolution? It is just an industrial policy which is intended to bring industries into India, which is intended to increase the industrialization in India, which envisages to increase the role of industries in the improvement of our GDP. If you see, industrial policy resolution we adopted with a goal of state controlling commanding heights of economy. So this is a very important concept because number of times UPSC has asked mains question on this particular concept, that is called goal of state controlling commanding heights of economy. What exactly meant by this state controlling commanding heights of economy? What is exactly meant by this commanding heights? Commanding heights in the sense controlling the economy. For example, to control the LPG gas cylinder in your house, what you do? You put a regulator on it. Once you switch on the regulator, gas will come out. Once you switch off the regulator, gas will stop. The flow of the gas will stop. Isn't it so? Here also, the public sector industries, they should control the economy. The public sector industries, they should play the role of regulator to the GDP of the country. Which means if public sector is in such a position, if public sector is working fine, GDP will increase. If the public sector is not working fine, GDP will decrease. So, the state controlling commanding heights of the economy, in the sense, the economical growth, that is called GDP, it should be strictly in the hands of the state through public sector industries. So, it is all about development of huge public sector industries the way Russia had developed, the way China had developed today, right? So, that is the concept. So, we gave more importance to what? We gave more importance to public sector, or we should give more importance to public sector as per this IPR 1956. It is based on second 5-year plan. If you remember my earlier class of 5-year plans, in the second 5-year plan, I exclusively explained to you Jawaharlal Nehru Mahalanobis model, the Indian statistician Mahalanobis, right? So that Mahalanobis, he brought a model. What was the Mahalanobis model in the second 5-year plan? Putting more investments on basic, heavy and capital industries, if you remember my earlier class. So if you have basic, heavy and capital industries, so definitely the public sector will be in a commanding position. So to revise that class, please go back to the link, that is 5-year plans. In the second 5-year plan, you will find that explanation. Once listen to that explanation, again come back so that you will understand more easily. And it classified industries into 3 categories. I told you already, this IPR 1956, it was based on second 5-year plan, because second 5-year plan was from 1956 to 1961. And it classified industries into 3 categories. Now let us find what are those 3 categories. So these are the 3 categories, Schedule A, B, C. What is the first category? Industries which would be exclusively owned by the states. Around 18 industrial or 18 sectors of the industry, they were exclusively by the state. What exactly meant by this exclusivity? Example, let's say telecommunications. Any company within this telecommunication industry, it should be started by the government. No private sector company is allowed to start a company in this telecommunication, right? Or else, let's take the defense. Any defense company, that should be only a government company. No private sector company is allowed. Today you see in India, still the defense is under public sector. But if you go to countries like France, where actually we are importing Rafale fighter jets, right? Who actually made the Rafale fighter jets? Dassault Aviation, the company name is. Is it a private sector company or a public sector company? It's a private sector company. Today in most of the world countries, the defense equipment is actually made by the private sector companies. But in India, Hindustan Aeronautical Limited, right? DRDO, all of these are what? They are actually public sector companies. Because still we are a developing country, we are still doing this defense production on our own. We haven't given this to private sector. So likewise 18 sectors. In all these 18 sectors, only the public sector companies, the government companies are allowed to start the business. The private sector companies are not allowed. For example, ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Exploration Company. This only can be done by the ONGC, that is a public sector company. No other company is allowed then days. That's why when the Reliance came only after 1991, right? Reliance today, it is doing the activities which ONGC is also doing. Today we have a private sector exploration company as well as a public sector exploration company. But before 1990, that too according to the IPR 1956, in 18 sectors, only public sector is allowed. For example, I am a very interested person to start an industry in telecom. It is not allowed. The government will say, no, you are not allowed to start a company because it is a public sector exclusivity. Today, this exclusivity came down to 3. Today, we have only 3 sectors where the complete government is functioning. In rest of all sectors, private sector is allowed. What are those 3 sectors today where government is only there? Railways. Railways belongs to government. Defense belongs to government. Atomic energy, because it is included with atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs. That is the reason why security purpose only these 3 industries, RDA, railways, defense, atomic energy. Apart from these 3 industries, rest of all industries private sector can enter. But in 1956 only the public sector was allowed in the 18 broad sectors of Indian economy. So imagine why private sector was not allowed in Indian economy, why the private sector did not develop on the lines of America, or United States of America or Japan. It is because of this reason. We gave importance to public sector. So this is Schedule A. What is Schedule B? Industries in which private sector could supplement the efforts of the state, with the state taking the sole responsibility for starting new units. Example, let's say state is making this shirt. The buttons, this will be given to private sector, which means the main industry would be under the control of public sector. Some chota mota works which are in supplementary nature, they would be given to private sector. Like if the government is building some cement industry, the transportation of that cement would be given to the private sector. So where the private sector could supplement. So private sector cannot start an industry, but it can help the public sector. So it's like a comedian. If public sector is hero or a leading actor in a movie, private sector would act as a supporting character, right? So supporting characters never win the Oscar awards, right? Isn't it so? So that is where this. So third one is remaining industries which were to be exclusively under the private sector. They were kept under the state control through a system of licenses. So this is exactly like this point, completely opposite. Here exclusively we gave the industries to sectors to public sector. Here exclusively private sector can start the business, but there is a system of license. Generally we call this as license Raj. So private sector was allowed other than these 18 industries, other than these 18 sectors. In rest of the sectors private sector is allowed, but even though the private sector is allowed freely other than these 18 sectors, any private sector industry to start a business, they had to secure a license from the government. Securing license is very difficult. The government, there is more corrupted people. Even if you want to start a private sector company, you have to give more bribes to the people or to the bureaucrats. Because of this, there was a huge problem in the Indian economy. So this system of license Raj, it never allowed private sector industries to improve the way they improved in the countries like United States of America. So this is your Industrial Policy Resolution 1956. So here we will stop this part 1 of structural bottleneckness of Indian economy. In the part 2, the continuation will be explained.